the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And today I'm joined again co-hosting by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Vin. How you doing?
I'm great. Living the dream, mate.
It's nice to be back.
Yes, it is. We've both had a bit of a breather, and it's 5 a.m. in the morning here, which is very, very early, but that's just,
That's most unfortunate, but I appreciate you getting up so early so that I don't have to.
Yes, and that's pretty much par for the course. Now, today, we also have a special guest, and that is Chris Mann, who is the co-owner and director of operations at Link Audio, who are a leading pro audio and music technology distributor here in Melbourne, Australia, that represent brands such as, and in no particular order, Presonus, Apogee, SPL, Waldorf, and Aston microphones, which I've been speaking into since the show's inception. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Vin. Thanks for having me.
Mate, you're most welcome, mate. You're most welcome. And thank you very much for getting up at this ungodly hour. So
that's okay. I have my coffee in hand.
Yes. As long as you've had your caffeine fix, that's awesome. Now, look, what I want to do to start off, and again, for anyone who's been following the podcast, this is following tradition. And I just want to give the listeners a quick overview of our personal history and interaction, which I believe goes back to 1998, Chris. Now, that's making us feel pretty old, but I crossed paths with you when you were the high-tech manager at one of the major distributors here in Australia. And they were the Steinberg distributor at the time. And we had the most interaction when you were the Nuendo product manager and product support person. But that was, I'm looking at the history. Nuendo came out in 2000, but I'm pretty sure we were talking about Nuendo pre-2000, mate. I'm pretty sure because, we were having discussions. I know there was just some development on SGI, which never really eventuated with Nuendo. But can you remember much about that time? It is late 90s.
Well, I do. I remember a lot about that time because they were, it was my first kind of entry into the industry.
Yes.
And I accidentally ended up at what was probably the wholesaler in the country that was right at the top of their game. Mm-hmm. It was an awesome place to work. There was unbelievable amount of talent in the building, and usually when you got into wholesale, you got through retail. Or you started at retail, but that wasn't how I got there.
Correct. Yeah.
I got there a little bit by accident, and thought, this is cool. I'll be here for a little bit. It's not what I want to do for forever, but it's kind of marrying the two things I love the most, which was computers and music. Mm-hmm. And I was actually very fortunate for those two things to come together. But pre-Steinberg, I guess at MusicLink, there was also Event Electronics and Echo sound cards as well. And I think we were doing a little bit of Layla and Gina and those other cards.
Yes, and the first Asia, and I was right in the front line with that. Now, just let me just set the stage for the people listening in. So this was about 1998 to 2000. Professional audio, locally and pretty much worldwide, was dominated by Pro Tools TDM. No question. Pro Tools TDM was very dominant in the market. Computers hadn't really evolved to that stage where the native processing was, of any value. You could barely run a real-time reverb. So if you wanted to run anything in real time regards DSP, it was via DSP chips. So TDM was at the top of the game. There was also in Sonic Paris. Do you remember that one, Chris? I do. I got parachuted into being the Paris guy, only because Pro Tools was more Apple. I was the Windows guy, and I'm kind of putting up my little air quotes. I was the Windows guy, so I got parachuted into supporting some Paris, which was, it was okay. I'm trying to remember. Sonic actually acquired that whole technology. I can't remember what the previous company was, and didn't really last that long. But that was the scenario where Steinberg introduced Nuendo, which was completely against the grain because Steinberg were focusing on VST. Now, the interesting thing with Pro Tools TDM, because it didn't have any MIDI, and I remember being in the front line there that, we've got producers and composers coming up going, I want to run Pro Tools TDM. How the hell am I going to run my MIDI? So, of course, you had to tie it up with one of the dedicated DAWs that had MIDI at the time. So there was Logic, Digital Performer, Opcode Vision, Studio Vision was the three main ones on Mac. And they used to integrate with the TDM hardware with a module, TDM module. Steinberg were really late to the game because, they were focusing on VST. So they had a vision for that. And I remember that, and you would have been kind of across this as well, because I know that you're very heavily involved with Pro Tools, which we can get into a little shortly. But if you remember Steinberg's TDM module, mate, that sucked, on Mac. It just completely sucked. And it didn't work. And then basically Steinberg threw their hands up and said, hey, this isn't working. Bugger you, we're heading for VST. But what the knock-on effect was there is that a lot of the professionals just crossed their arms and went, well, it's not a professional product anymore. And so Cubase got kind of tagged as being non-professional. Again, I'm using these air quotes. So I used to call it the C word. Steinberg got this stigma of the C word in the professional circles, and enter Nuendo. And I remember the marketing. Nuendo, completely new genealogy, fresh code, ground up, nothing to do with Cubase. I remember that distinctly. They go, this has got nothing to do with Cubase. This is brand new, And then they kind of hit the ball, hit the ground running. They kind of hooked up with RME with the hardware. Remember, we had those bundled Nuendo, full packages with software and hardware. And that's where we started really interacting a lot more. But I think what would be great now is that you do have a long and very varied history, even leading up to that point, right? So can you give us an overview of how you got into your computers and technology at a younger age, and how you got to that point where we actually cross paths, and then how you've eventually moved through wearing many, many hats and have now, landed at basically owning and running Link Audio.
I can, and it's a pretty funny story, the whole lot of it, really, because nobody in my family was computer literate. Even still, there's nobody in my family that's computer literate.
But your dad's a leading post-production film editing guy, isn't he?
He was a video producer.
Producer, right.
Yeah,
sorry.
But, like with a lot of the customers that we deal with, I tend to find they either are very technical or very creative. Yeah. And you don't really have the two that mix. And he was very creative. He saw shots and visions, and he could read scripts backwards, and he could shoot things out of order, and they would all come through just beautifully. Where I was the opposite. I was very technical, and it just happened. I think it was somewhere in primary school, around about grade 5, or heading into grade 6, and I was lucky enough to go to one of those schools that had one of those technological in the future kind of programs, where they dropped a whole lot of Apple II pluses, in the classrooms.
Cool.
And I couldn't keep my eyes off the thing. I was like, what's that thing? What does that do? What can I do with that? You know, no one was really interested, but I was like, that's a computer. And I was fascinated with it. I wanted to know what that could do, and I wanted to know what I could do with it, and I wanted to know how far I could push it. And, you know, that's like, we're talking late 80s, 16 colors, you know, you 1 megahertz processors. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, our current smartphones are probably 500 times more powerful.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But back in the day, you know, what I found with that is, like a lot of schools, every term we did like a, you know, grade 5, 6 newsletter, and it was all handwritten and hand drawn. And I pretty much single-handedly took the whole newsletter for the middle of the term and computerized it, and got into the desktop publishing and fonts and loved it. And that was really the start. And I think that, along with my dad being a video producer, and back in those days they used to go on their productions, and the truck would come home overnight, and you'd offload all this broadcast gear, because, you know, that is my true beginning. I did grow up in the broadcast industry. And Betacam SP cameras would come out, and tons of audio equipment would come out, and I was just like all over it. What does this do? Where does this connect? How do I plug this in? And I was naturally drawn to audio and music and computers all in the same time. Started kind of some piano lessons at the same time as well, and I think it just gradually grew through there. The big change was really, I think, that my dad being where he was and being with a whole lot of people that were very computer literate in that facility that he was working, was I was lucky enough to get an Amiga 1000. You know, for around about 80, 89, I think it was 88, 89. And that was the turning point. I think when that thing landed at home, and suddenly it was like 4,000 colors, 12-bit, you know, 8-bit audio. I just took that machine and I just jammed it in every possible way I could, you know, whether it was scanning images, making music with trackers, and making music on it was a real big thing. And then the video thing started with that as well. And I think that just continued all the way through school and all the way through high school, to the point where I think I owned about 3 or 4 different Amigas over that time. Couldn't get enough of them, you know, like everything else at that point just seemed, well, it was backwards. There was just nothing at that point that did what it did.
The Amiga was pretty amazing at the time. Did you have the video toaster with it, or?
So I did end up at an Amiga 4000 with a video toaster in it. I did end up with one of those systems, and you know, we used to switch a lot of video gigs with it, and also do a lot of animation. And it was just so far ahead of anything else, and I just loved it. I don't know where that came from, but that passion just grew and grew and grew. And you know, I think even what I was doing and creating with it blew pretty much everyone in my family away, because there was really no one else around us that was doing that. And then I think even getting through high school, you know, there was a lot of Acorn machines around, and funnily enough, when I was looking at that the other day, doing some research, it was, you know, they were ARM-based machines, which was hilarious because we've kind of almost done a full circle.
Yeah, you've done the full circle, Acorn. So what operating system were they running, Chris?
Well, they were running their own proprietary kind of operating system, but most of them that we had at high school were based around learning how to code. So there's a lot of basic and C++ code and stuff that went on those, and that's kind of all they let us do. But by the time I hit those things at high school, I was already coding on my Amiga and already doing all those things. So, you know, for me, that was just a bit of an extension into then, I think, deciding that I loved computers that much, to the point where my studies were like, okay, well, I want to jump into a computer course because that's what I really thought I wanted to do. And that's what I ended up doing. You know, I ended up studying computer science and engineering at uni. By the time that period, mid-90s came through, you know, unfortunately, the Amiga had gone bankrupt, which was devastating. Not surprising. I mean, you know, some of the greatest times in that period were going to the swap meets.
I remember those.
Oh,
things.
Man.
The Melbourne swap meets.
I mean, I missed weddings and birthdays because I had to go to you weren't going to stop me going to the Essendon Amiga users group every third Tuesday of the month. It was just, And there were so many creative guys around, and they'd do so many inspiring demos, and they were all different. Guys were doing video stuff. There wasn't a lot of audio stuff, but they were doing coding and animation, and but the amount of disc swapping and horrible things that went on in the background,
yes.
were really probably what killed the platform. Software developers just couldn't make any money because no one was buying software.
And that's interesting, because I wonder if that was the demise of Atari as well, because while you were headlong in with the Amiga, mate, my introduction to computers was the Atari, the 1040 STE, and then I had Amiga 4 at the end. And it was I used it purely as my MIDI sequencer. I didn't get into the graphic side of stuff. But as you mentioned, the disc swapping and look, let's just call it what it was. the pirating was rampant on the Atari as well.
Oh, it was terrible, and it was regrettable. I think if I had that time over, I'd stand up in those meetings and go, stop, because you just didn't want to see that platform end up where it ended up. But, that's kind of how it did.
You know what it was? I think we were...
It was too easy was the problem. You take your floppy disk, you copy it to another one, and off you went home.
Yeah, and people weren't really thinking of the knock-on effect to these smaller developers and stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me that, Amiga and Atari were two of these platforms that were precursors to the Windows, for me at least, and they both kind of went the way of the dodo.
Yeah, they did, which was unfortunate. And I think at that point it took Apple especially quite some time to catch up. And then I sort of moved across to Notator and Logic a little bit on Mac, I guess, coming into that Music Link period. And then I So
Notator was on Mac as well? I thought they started with Logic. So there you go. I didn't even realize Notator was on Mac. I thought it was just Atari.
Logic ended up being, I think, a version somewhere there where they moved over, and we had all those horrible, huge dongles that hung off the back of the computers that the size of a mouse at the moment.
I've still got some.
Yep.
I couldn't throw them out. I've got a whole string of them.
Yes. Yeah. Look, but it had to be done. I think they learnt the lesson of some of those machines beforehand and went, well, if you want to use our software, you need to have this piece of hardware. And it completely made sense. Somewhere around about into uni, I think I got offered a job, computer system sort of analysis. Well, it was a little bit more of an admin job running Solaris machines at an insurance company.
Yes.
And I generally, that's what I wanted to do. I was very keen on that. I think Unix at the time was really interesting to me. I really enjoyed looking after those machines and being a little bit more of that person. But a few months into that job, and when I say a few months into that job, I think they picked up a few of us around about third year of uni and said, come work for us and you can finish your uni course on the side.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was cool, and offered us a lot of money, which was also cool.
Yes, very cool.
But funnily enough, everything we'd done at uni was not really what they were looking for. So we set all our Microsoft certifications, Windows NT server certifications, and the whole lot, which was great. They all paid for that. And a few months down the track, I started not liking the job. I didn't like the way that people treated or looked down at us for what we did. Like there wasn't a lot of interaction. People didn't want to talk to you. Was stuck in this little office because all I wanted to do was go out and make music. So, the whole week became, yay, it's Friday, let's go. I want to go off and do a gig and music. And I played in bands for a little bit, but that very quickly turned into wanting to do more recording and wanting to do more engineering stuff. So I kind of liked that side of it a lot. And then I got the phone call. I had a good family friend of mine who worked at a music shop in Brunswick. Shout out to Ken, who was working at Music Link in the drum department at the time, who rang up out of the blue and said, hey, there's a job going here and you are the man for this job. You are made for it. You need to come down and have a talk to these guys. And I was like, what are you talking about, Ken? You know, no, maybe, you know, I'll see if I'm free. Because I'd never heard of wholesale. I knew of retail. I'd been in many stores. I knew all the brands. As soon as I looked up who they were, I went, yep, Korg and Pearl and Event Electronics and Echo. And I know all these brands. So I went in and had the interview, and that was the turning point where they just gave me a chance. You know, they just went, "Yep, you're hired," and I literally just went into the next day to where I was and went, "I'm leaving," and I started there, and it ended up being an awesome place to work, and you know, and technology wise, you know, it was a really profound time because we were seeing things like Reason and Opcode Studio coming out, and even Cubase kind of really starting to take some shape, and Logic taking shape as well, you know, and even things like, you know, a lot of those Steinberg products really being pretty dominant. It took Steinberg, I don't think Music Link was at Steinberg when I first started. I think it was a couple of years in when that ended up being picked up.
Yeah, that's right. There was another company. No. Music Link had Steinberg in '98, mate. I'm sure they did.
Remember, so there was a company in Sydney that was doing it.
Yes. I know, and I worked with them quite a lot, and I was very intimate with a few of those guys, and they were very difficult to deal with because to say they were one-eyed Mac is an understatement. I mean, I almost got into fisticuffs with some of those guys. It was horrid for me, and I'm trying to represent their product on the Windows platform, and they just basically I was that was an afterthought pretty much, and that changed significantly when they lost that distribution and it went to Music Link because. You guys were pretty much platform agnostic. You could, of course you're going to be passionate towards one platform or another, but that was not. It was not displayed as well to the level that I was experiencing from those previous guys.
Well, that was me. I didn't care. I love Windows and I love what was going on, and I love Mac and I love my Amiga, and I had my BOS running, and platforms for me were just a way to be really creative. I don't think even still I don't have a preference. You know, there's 10 or 12 machines at home here at the moment, and they're half Mac and half Windows, and I wouldn't have it any other way, you know.
And that's one of the things that has, I suppose, kept our friendship going over 20 plus years, is that I can actually speak to you regards cross-platform performance. And you don't get emotional about it. You're just like, well, there's no emotional attachment. No. So apart from you, I can honestly say, and you probably know who I'm speaking about. I won't name him because it's not kind of fair. But there's one other person that in all of the 20 plus years, and we've all been interacting together, and we all kind of saw each other recently at a gig, where this person is highly technical, amazing level of knowledge, and he's also platform agnostic, couldn't get into the whole Mac versus PC thing. And so there's in all of those years, Chris, and in the industry that we've been navigating, this zoo, I call it the zoo, I've met two people in this high-tech area that you can have an objective conversation without them getting emotional about a platform. That's quite unique to me, you know. So this is why I wanted to get you on, because we're going to be diving headlong into some cross-platform stuff later. And, look, I'm a PC DAW solution provider. Pete works at Microsoft. We needed someone that could at least give us a bit of an angle on the Mac side, you know. Yeah. So, look, just sorry for interrupting. I just so at Music Link, we've just got to the Nuendo stage.
They were interesting conversations because there was a lot of talk between us and Steinberg, and they were talking to a lot of people about whether or not they wanted to put post features into Cubase, whether that was a smart idea. I think everyone in the community went, no, I don't think the post guys are going to like that. So they basically went, well, we'll just do a whole new software package. And we kind of went, okay.
Yeah, it was the C word. It was they seriously had a stigma, unfortunately, that they needed to get past. You know, so Nuendo was it, and so yeah. Can you give us some overview of that, because that was, like I said, that was really interesting times.
They were hard times because, like any new software that comes out, version 1 was not great. You know, it really took a couple of years into pushing really hard and making a lot of changes. And we were also lucky enough that we did have a lot of people that came forward in that post market who were real happy to put back some feedback and to say, look, you know, just being honest with you guys, but it needs this, this, and this. And I spent a lot of time on the beta forums and a lot of times, you know, talking directly back to Steinberg, giving them as much feedback as I could, because it's what I like doing. You know, even myself, you know, we were head into doing videos and stuff at home with Dad anyway. So we were doing a lot of post audio editing. I was really a bit of a power user off it anyway. And really it took probably a couple of years for it to start to establish as something really stable. It was at that time never really threatening Pro Tools in any sort of way, shape, or form.
No, nothing was.
You know, and I don't think it really ever did in a way. No. But I think the big change was somewhere down the track. I can't remember the exact timing, maybe 3 or 4 years later, when Euphonics got on board and made some hardware controllers for it, because that's when a lot of the guys went, oh, this is serious. You've actually got a big dedicated surface, even though it costs like 50 grand.
Yeah, there was one previous to the Euphonics stuff, but the Euphonics stuff was reasonably later. It was. But look, the interesting thing with Nuendo as well was that, so they went out of their way to go, hey, Nuendo, this has nothing to do with Cubase. Nothing. There's zero genealogy shared between the two. And then in 2003, with N2, Nuendo 2, they merged it with SX2.
Well, yes. So remember, it was a module. So you bought Nuendo, and then if you wanted the Cubase MIDI part.
No, that's Nuendo 3.
Okay, there you go. So
that was Nuendo. Yeah, they called it the Nuendo expansion kit or something. But with Nuendo 2, where that was interesting was that where they were focusing on post, and they're probably thinking, look, we're not winning over as much as the post market as we like. And they started that thing called the Nuendo Producer Group. Remember that?
I do.
And they got all of those American producers on board. And so then they started shifting the focus away from post into higher-end music production, and this is where they were starting to target more of the Pro Tools studio guys, right? So my first batch of Nuendo clients were not post-production guys. They were producers, music engineers and producers. Some of them were actually ex-Paris, but they kind of came in and, you know, you couldn't even say the word Cubase to them, but they go, Nuendo? Oh, yeah, mate. Yeah, that's killer, right? And it was kind of funny. So when we got to Nuendo 2, if you fired up Nuendo 2 and Cubase side by side, you could barely tell the difference, you know. But to them, it was Nuendo, right? You don't mention Cubase. And there was quite a few of those. And then Steinberg, you know, they just did a backflip. They went, nah, it's not. Nothing to do with music production, music producers, you can go to Cubase. And I tell you what, we'll even go to the point of removing the Cubase features out of it. And that's what you're talking about. In Nuendo, where they remove the Cubase features. And I'm going, what Cubase features did they remove? Well, they removed the drum editor.
Yeah. the notation.
And the notation. And you could buy that extra, the NEK they called it. And we just thought, geez, that was a contentious period, if you remember. That was so explosive on the forums going, what are you doing? They go, well, mate, you know, this is a post-production app. We're going, hang on. You've been marketing this thing as a music production tool, and now all of a sudden you're doing the big backflip. So, look, there was some prominent end users there in that Nuendo community that were whispering in that ear that I think triggered that change.
Influencers,
we'll call them influencers, and a lot of them are really good friends of mine. Not all right. Those guys are still. Well, they had a lot of say in the direction that Nuendo took, and you know what? They can actually take a lot of the responsibility for it being exactly where it is today, in my opinion, right? They decided to take that direction, shut out all the music production guys, predominantly marketed towards the post, right? Which is all well and good. But then on the forums, anyone that wasn't post was treated as a second-rate citizen. Everyone basically bailed off the platform. Most of my Nuendo guys bailed off, they bailed off. There's a couple of Nuendo post guys left in Melbourne, Pete. I mean, when I say a couple, I'm talking a couple, right? That I know that are still using it. I don't know what's actually happened to that platform, but that was, after you left the building, I think a lot of the momentum was lost. And I'm trying to remember, what year was that when you kind of bailed out?
2004 was when MusicLink finished for me. I think things changed there.
Yeah.
And it was time for the next job. Pretty sad day. I really loved that place. I had a good amount of 4 years there and made a lot of friends and met a lot of guys in retail. And they beat me up a bit too. I think when I first started, they threw me straight in front of all the prominent guys in the store.
Like me. Yep. Sorry, man.
No, that's okay. But it's every state, So there was a couple of hardcore guys that had hardcore customers that needed questions and stuff and answers. So I learned pretty quick on my feet, and it was a good experience. And then the company changed a little bit, unfortunately, and things started to happen. So other opportunities arose, and for me, that's when I went to Behringer. So I did something completely different. That's not something that I planned to do. That was a brand that was at MusicLink and ended up changing direction. And
it got splintered, yeah.
Yeah, it did. So I started working for more of a manufacturer, doing support and service for all the distributors, or at least across Asia and some of South America. So it's a bit of a different point of view, and loved that as well. Loved the fact that it was to see a product go from R&D through to getting design, through to development, through all those processes was pretty fascinating. The product itself was pretty boring. As far as what it did, it kind of did what it did really well on a budget.
Yep.
The company did really, really well over those 10 years. But, at that time I was still gigging, still making music, still making videos, and still doing all the stuff that I loved.
Yep.
And that was about 10 years, I think I was there. I think I hit my long service there.
Yep.
That kind of went pretty quick. That's where I also ended up meeting Michael Jago, who's now the other co-owner of Link Audio.
Yes.
He was also at MusicLink as well, but I think we sort of did the Behringer thing together, and Ian Flowers as well.
Yes.
Who's offered a different wholesale company at the moment as well.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that came to an abrupt end as well. When I say abrupt end, it was 10 years. It was quite a long time.
But when it came very, very quickly, if I remember.
They changed. They just basically went different distribution model. Yes, we don't need you guys anymore. We don't need support. See you later. Big mistake. I had wholesalers from every country in the world ringing me for about 6 months after that process, still trying to get help. But, we ended up at different companies, Michael and I, and we kept in contact, and we didn't really like where we were working at the time. And there's no real, well, that's not true. I kind of did like where I was for the first couple of years. It was a good experience there as well. But, we just sort of sat around talking, going, it'd be really good if we could make our own decisions, because we don't really like some of the decisions that are getting made in some of those other wholesale companies. They seem to be doing some weird stuff. And, where I was PreSonus distributor, not focusing too well on retail, because that wasn't really their strength. And one of those things where, PreSonus were like, we're not really happy, which was unfortunate, because they weren't really happy where they were previously either.
No, they were moving around. Yeah.
So that opportunity came purely from industry friends and relationships, where I think, you know, our previous Behringer relationship opened the door for that. And that's where Link Audio started. It started purely as a PreSonus distribution.
Yes.
Which sort of propelled me straight back into DAWs and computers and all the stuff that I love so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think yesterday or the day before, it was 6 years now that we've been doing Link Audio.
Has it been 6 years?
Yeah. Yep. It's been a while. So, you know, that's a long time with PreSonus. That's a long time with people's computer problems and support and all the stuff that goes with software-based platforms, as you know.
Uh-huh. We can get into that a little bit later.
Yeah. And that's been an interesting journey as well, because, you know, Studio One's been something that has drawbacks back to, you know, guys that were ex-Steinberg and all that stuff that I'm sure we'll cover as well. But
yeah, well, look, we had Matthias on, and he gave us some great insight into that whole dynamic there. So look, so sorry, and so you guys have been, that's 6 years, and you've been slowly just, you know, one thing that I like how you and Michael operate is that you just slowly, you're not what I call brand collectors, right? And you know what I mean by brand collectors. These are the distributors that will just sit down, they will corner a brand and then do nothing with it, but they've basically cornered it. You know, it's like the guys who used to buy those web domains and just park them, right?
Yep.
And you guys don't do that. You've got your select brands and you represent them all very, very well. And I think it's great. I still can't believe it's been 6 years, though.
Well, I think we learned that lesson at Behringer. I think we learned that, you know, if you focus on one brand and put energy and marketing and stuff behind it, it can do super well. And that was really the what we want to do with PreSonus. It was like, well, let's just focus on every area, because they make a lot of stuff. Yes. And when you're distributing a brand that makes a lot of product, not just focuses on one thing, it works differently. People's perception of it are different. People think because they make lots of stuff, everything can't be great. And it's not true. I mean, there's areas where stuff is great, and there's obviously areas where stuff can be better. Every company is like that. But it is different to just saying, I'm just going to take on one brand that just does one thing really well. You got to tackle it really differently. Yeah. And that's always been the plan. And I think that's what's made it successful over the last 6 years. We sort of took it from nowhere to somewhere. And you know, they've also helped along the way by dropping a whole lot of new products all the time, which is awesome. Yes. That's what you want. Yeah.
And their hardware and software are completely different operations, you know, from my understanding. I mean, of course, there's a centralized body, so to speak, in the US. But from what I could make out, their software department development is completely autonomous, or maybe not completely.
Yeah,
autonomous.
So that has advantages and disadvantages. The big advantage is software hardware integration is the best in the industry. No one does it better. Yep. And that's where magic is with that brand. And I think they've come over the last year or two much closer together. I think the hardware guys are, I think they're using the software talents to integrate hardware more. And that's been one area that I've really liked, you know, because it is a really magical thing when you see it working and when you understand it. And also a big point of difference. No one really else has that. And that's been really interesting to watch evolve over some time. Yeah.
And look, and some of the other brands you've been picking up have been great supplements. I mean, Apogee is one of your newest ones. I actually like that you picked up Apogee, because that gives me the opportunity to have a bit of a play now, when previously I didn't. So that's kind of cool. Look, I think that pretty much covers.
That's me.
That pretty much covers
25 years.
Man.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think what we'll do now, and hopefully, Pete, are you still there, mate?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah,
I'm just enjoying the conversation.
Yeah. No, sorry, mate. I am going to be handing the mic over to you, because there's a stack of stuff that I need you to kind of cover a little bit later. But before I get to you, Pete, what I want to do is I just want to give everyone a bit of an overview of what's happening with the DAWbench Suite 2021, because a few people have said, well, is this project of yours stopped? Have you stopped it? Is it still continuing? And I'm going, Yeah, it is continuing. I haven't really released a lot in the last couple of years, and I mean the thing. Once we got blindsided by the changes in that MMCSS area, and the real-time engine in Cubase was basically compromised. Well, let's say the word compromised, right? And I couldn't use it for the DAWbench suite, and everything moved to Reaper. One of the interesting things that we found is that, and this is the discussion that I've been having with pretty much all the DAW developers, is that the sticking point for everyone listening in is that the consistency when it comes to higher core threading is not there, right? Especially when we get into higher core systems with high levels of memory. Now, people are going, what are you talking about? Reaper's got the best multi-threading in the market. Yeah, to about 32 threads. And this is the discussion I had with Justin nearly 2 years ago, and pretty much I've had the same discussion with every DAW developer. Me and Pete have covered it ad infinitum. We don't know what the hell this 32 thread ceiling is, but this is the type of things that we've been navigating. And with Reaper specifically, there is, and it's an amazing DAW, but it's basically a DIY DAW. I mean, there's just so many options. And when it comes to the threading, that can be a bit of a problem because there's too many parameters you can play with. So just to put a really fine point of what we've been navigating is that, and this is a perfect example. So one of my development machines that I've created the new sessions with, and the new DAWs, the new DAWbench sessions are all 24-bit in 44, 48, and 96. And I know Pete will be very happy that they're now in 96 because I know that's his native sample rate that he runs his machines on. So there's, yeah, so there you go, Pete. I didn't forget you. So that was a huge undertaking on my part. And so when we're doing the R&D, so I'm developing these sessions, and the plugin session is not a problem. You know, we've actually we've doubled the number of tracks from 40 to 80 stereo tracks. Actually more. The 80 stereo tracks are actually the load tracks, and then there's another five odd tracks or so for music and reference. And all of the plug-in ones, that's fine, right? So we've got 24-bit, 44, 48, 96, 640 plugins. That works fine, right? It's not a problem. Then, and it scales accordingly. When we get to the virtual instrument one, I dropped the multi-part contact sessions, which were a bit of an issue with some of the DAW developers, saying because Contact had its own multi-threading, it was interfering with their own threading models. So I thought, okay, so I've gone and redone the sessions. So the current DAWbench VI sessions are 496 individual instances of Contact, right? 496. And 9,600 notes of additional polyphony on top of the orchestral template, right? So I've thought I'm going to get a little bit of headroom here, especially with, the 96K one. That's going to do me for the next 10 years, I reckon. Now, the problem with we discovered with Reaper, though, is that when you have these really large sessions with lots of tracks, and I'm still trying to get to the bottom of this with Justin, it does some type of resource reserving depending on the number of cores that you have. So I'm building these tracks. I've got a development machine with a 6-core 12-thread, 16 gigabyte of RAM, and I can build this 496 instrument template because the majority of the actual instruments are not only muted, they're actually offline. So they're completely offline, right? And that session will go to about, reserve about 50% and of the CPU, available CPU, and it will take all of the 16 gigabyte of RAM, 15.8, I think it stopped at, right? 15.8. So it's very intelligent. You can see, okay, how much RAM have you got? What kind of CPUs? And it'll reserve some of the CPU resources. And when I say reserve, what it means, it doesn't mean it uses it. It actually reserves it, and then it doesn't actually add any additional load until you actually use what you've reserved. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it reserves a level that reserve has to be used before it actually puts any additional load on. The problem is that once we started getting to the 16 and the 18 core machines and we loaded the template, the reserve was 100% CPU. It was pegged. It wouldn't even move, right? So even with all of the instruments disabled, we were getting 100% lockout on the CPU, and the memory was, I don't know, 40 gig or something, right? So it used a large amount of the memory, more obviously, substantially more memory, but the problem was the CPU lockout. We're thinking, well, this is unusable. So I've been navigating backward and forward with Justin. We've been playing with the threading mode. There's a couple of settings there. We discovered one setting which immediately has halved the reserve resource, which helped. But I still have never had a complete answer of what is going on once we get into those higher core machines and we get this ridiculous amount of reserve resource, to the point where if we left it at the default setting, the session with nothing playing was locked. So that's the problem. That's the problem we've been navigating. We're getting there. We discovered a couple of other little of these, available available settings where we were smoothing out the scaling, because we have been experimenting with some of those settings where we thought we'd actually resolved everything, but then you wouldn't get the same result on running the test twice, because there was an automatic setting that was actually changing the threading model, right, depending on load and stuff. So that's the reason there's been no public release of the sessions, because we just couldn't stabilize anything for those higher core machines. Once we it's
quite a service. Sorry, it's quite a service you're providing to them though on this, because if you didn't find it out now, their customers would find it out in a couple of years. And these high core count, developing for high core count machines is different from developing for the normal kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. And once you optimize for one, it doesn't necessarily apply to the other. So they kind of have to think differently about it.
Well, that's the perfect example I'm giving is that I'm doing my R&D for these sessions. I'm building them on a 6-core 12-thread. I mean, like it's a 7-year-old machine, right? It's just one of my development machines that I build the sessions on. And I thought it was fine. And then I'm moving it to an 18-core, 64 gigabyte of RAM, and the thing's locked before I even press play. And you're going, well, what happened there? But yeah, and this is something we can discuss a little bit further on, Pete, because that was some of the stuff that was really interesting that came out of the conversations with those DAW developers. Because if you noticed, what was one of my main questions? What kind of development are you doing with those higher core machines? And you remember the answers were, well, let's leave it to a little bit later, because the answers kind of knocked me on my ass a bit, because the short answer was they weren't. All right, they simply weren't. So we'll cover that a little bit later, because that's a little bit further down. So that's where we're at with DAWbench Suite 2021. The other thing that I will officially announce now is that there is a new website coming for DAWbench. There is going to be a reintroduction of a forum. So I am picking this ball back up again, and there's going to be massive work happening with the DAWbench site, the podcast, and there's also an umbrella site that encompasses not only DAWbench but a stack of other stuff, which I won't announce just yet because the site's not prepared. All of the web domains are locked in. Pete knows a little bit about it. Chris knows,
looking forward to it.
Yeah, Chris knows a little bit about it. So it is going to be something that is going to be more than just DAWbench. It's going to be I'm going to reintroduce a community, and I've got big plans for it. So let's just leave it at that. There is a lot happening. There's going to be just a landing site for the DAWbench in the next couple of weeks. I've got a nice new landing page for DAWbench, and that's just going to direct us through the current stuff. And then once I build the overarching one, then I'll announce it and kind of launch that. And I think it'll be fun, Pete. I think it'll be real fun. Okay, so that's DAWbench. I will say that because a lot of people are hanging out on, where are the CPU comparative performance tests? Poor old Pete from Scan Audio has been in the front line with me trying to settle these sessions. He's he's about 80, 90% there. He's got a massive report that's about to come out. There's some interesting stuff. I've already got a lot of the results. I won't give too much away, but there's some interesting stuff coming out with obviously AMD versus Intel. So I'll leave that for Pete to be able to report. But I think there's going to be a few surprises there, and let's just leave it at that until we actually get those reports done. All right, now. I do want to just you and me, Pete, have a bit of a summary about some of the, the information that came out with those DAW Evolution podcasts we did with the interviews with the DAW developers. And look, I just touched on it before, but one of the things that I found most intriguing, one, the good old MMCSS topic, which I always brought up, and I know a couple of listeners have been laughing, going, "Oh, Vin, you're like a dog with a bone." I'm going, I know, but
sorry, there must be a delivery right now because I'm going to go leave for like 10 minutes.
No, I'm not going to get into my MMCSS rant, and that I've actually. I've actually designed I have survived MMCSS T-shirt, and
right,
and I will offer it up, but I don't think we're out of the woods. And just the small, I'll make a short point on MMCSS, which really stood out for me during those interviews, was that I asked a question with every one of them, and everyone had a different answer of how they actually navigated it. That was one. And the second one was that there was a few of them that were completely blindsided. We're talking 2 years after we navigated it, and they were completely blindsided. I mean, look, I'll even mention Noel, right, from Cakewalk, messaged me and said, "Hey, I've run into a problem with some MMCSS thread limiting. Do you know anything about it?" Which almost fell off the chair. I'm going, "You're kidding me, aren't you?" And I passed him out what we call, and I'm air quoting, unofficial fix, and he implemented it 3-4 days later into Cakewalk, right? Yep. So we know it works. It's not official, right? So, but we'll leave it at that, right? But it is interesting that every one of those developers had a different way of navigating it. Now, can you kind of give us a little bit of insight? Because it came down to the way that they were actually threading and the thread pool and all the rest of it. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview on that, Pete, from your perspective of what the guys were feeding back to us?
Yeah, I mean, so the Microsoft take is that we want people to use the thread pool, right? So that so they're not using up all the kind of resources in the system. Now, we can agree or disagree if that's the right approach there, but long term, what happens is that these different developers, they have their own threading approaches that they've had for years and years and years. They're not building a DAW from scratch today. They've got quite a bit of history in there, and kind of ripping and replacing all that is a lot of work for them, right? And nobody really wants to take that on versus adding new features in or supporting, say, like the M1 or something like that, right?
Yes.
So they put all these little kind of patches around it, and like you said, everybody does it differently. And some limit the number of cores available. Some do other crazy things with trying to reuse some of the threads out and have their own thread pool and stuff. But ultimately, like I said, we want people to use our thread pool. But I think speaking unofficially here, we need to bend a little bit on this and look at some of these limits, especially when it starts coming to these really high core count PCs.
Yeah. I mean, look, in short, the ideal solution would have been if Microsoft did and I'm doing my air quotes again, official fix, right? But that that didn't come about. So I still apply my MMCSS fix on every machine that I deploy, whether they the DAWs are directly affected or not, because that was one of the things that came out of that conversation, is that I personally feel that some of those problems with the threading on some of the other DAWs were actually MMCSS related, and they weren't even aware of it. And this brings up my second point, because the question that I asked every one of them was, what is the maximum core count thread limit that you guys are developing for or on?
Right.
And if you remember, the answer was pretty much, we don't develop on high cores. And one of the comments was, we don't look at max core, we look at average core. Now I've gone, well, what's an average core? And do you remember what the answer was?
Wasn't it 6 or 4 or something like that?
It was 12 threads.
Was it 12 really? Oh.
Yeah. No, not 12.
12 total, yeah.
Yeah, not 12 core, 24 thread, 12. Right?
Yeah, 12.
So I've gone, wow, okay. And I even asked, you guys don't have a higher core development machine? Nope. Or one of them did, but they weren't using it for DAW testing. They were using it for compiling. I've gone, well, why don't you just throw the software on there? Oh, it's not really configured for that. I've gone, right. So this is the problem. This is where we're seeing the problems with and I'll just go back to Steinberg really quickly, even though they can't speak for themselves. But with Steinberg on the Windows platform, I know that the real-time engine, we've already covered that a million times, so I won't even go there, right? But even with Azure Guard on, there is at least they've made a provision for 36 threads, which means that the 18-core 1090-80XE can thread to the 36, all right? If I go back to version 9, and it'll thread to 36 with Azure Guard on, and if I turn Azure Guard off with my fix, it threads exactly to 32. So there was the limit. There was that 32. So they've made a provision of 36, right? But once we get above that, we start talking thread rippers, and everyone's going, Vin, why aren't you developing on thread rippers? I'm going, because the software has not caught up to the hardware, which is the complete opposite of what we've been dealing with for the last 20 years, right? You would have thought, because before, the software was exhausting the hardware for all those years, right?
Exactly. And actually, so Vin, that's why these folks are saying, like, oh, they want to develop for these average systems, because they're afraid that if they have a really high core count system, they'll get performance that's way above what the average user could get.
Yeah, and why is that a problem?
They'll be kind of sloppy, right?
Right.
So, right, so they'll be sloppy. They'll not realize that, oh, this thing performs really horribly on a 6-core system. And the only other clarification I'd want to make here is we're talking CPU threads, because the applications themselves spawn hundreds of threads for different processes.
But when I say cores and threads, it's that kind of we've had this conversation. It's let's call it Intel speak. When they say 12 core, 24 thread, or 16 core, 32 thread, right? So and I'll just bring up this last point. So when they're not developing on these higher core systems, we ran into a situation where we have, when I say we, Pete's been testing on these larger thread rippers.
Pete from Scan
has been testing on these thread rippers. So we got 32, 64 core. I've got the screenshots and the results. It's hilarious. Absolutely. Yeah. Just forget about it, right? They do not scale to those level of cores. I don't care that the Reaper is claiming that they thread to 128. It just does not thread cleanly to those number of cores.
High count multi-threading is a hard computer science problem.
Of course it is.
I think a lot of people don't realize how hard it is until
we're realizing now.
They get into it.
Well, we're realizing now.
Right.
We're realizing now. So, and I'll just make this one last point. So, with the thread rippers, I was following a thread where a guy had built a 32 core 64 thread machine, and he was trying to. And he was a film composer, and he was trying to run Cubase 10 with it. Cubase 9? No, it was Cubase 10. And he basically had to turn off the hyperthreading, or what AMD call it, SMT, simultaneous multithread. So you had to disable, had to go back to 32 threads. The thing just did not operate. And I thought, yep, I know that. In Cubase 11, I don't know what Steinberg did, but anything above, I don't know where the tipping point is, but anyone running those thread rippers, 24, 30, 32 core, everything lands on one core. So they
Right.
completely broke it, right? So I went, wow, okay. And just one final point on that threading, because we've got a stack of stuff that we want to get through. OS X. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I haven't done any testing myself, but I had a industry colleague reach out to me saying, hey, you know what? I've been following your stuff. I've been with the threading with Cubase. I've been kind of experimenting with some of the benchmarks and even some internal stuff, and I noticed some weird stuff with the threading. And I've gone, okay, well, you want to outline that for me? And so on OS X,
Mac OS, yeah.
Sorry, Mac OS. That's right. It's not called OS X anymore, right? Mac OS. All right. So on Mac OS, if you turn ASIO guard off, it immediately drops all the hyper-threaded cores, right? Immediately. But it's not core limited to like it is on Windows, but it just automatically drops the hyper-threaded cores. Okay, that's fair enough. That kind of explains. Remember, Steinberg did a U-turn on me saying, it's got nothing to do with multimedia class shell as a service. It's got everything to do with the hyper-threading didn't work on the earlier versions. I went, what are they talking about? I think they were referring to Mac OS, right? And here's the more interesting one. 10 core, 18 core, 36 thread machine, iMac Pro, right? You call up Cubase, even with ASIO guard on, how many threads do you think you're seeing in the activity meter?
I'm not even going to guess.
18.
Go ahead.
18.
Oh, yeah.
Completely dropped the hyper-threaded cores. In other words, it sensed that the thing was over 32 threads, went pang straight away. It dropped half of the core count out.
Which I don't get, because that's the only way to saturate an Intel CPU.
Correct.
So I don't understand why we would drop that. Like it really means that the CPU is sitting idle roughly 30% of its time.
I don't know. And you know what? I've tagged that guy, that colleague a few times to say, can you give me some more detail? And he's gone on radio silence about it. And I've got I don't want to assume, but I've got a feeling that he may have been tapped on the shoulder and gone, don't you go, don't you go giving any more detail on that one, right? And I've gone, okay, so that's cool. But that was interesting. So I think, that whole hyper-threaded argument that they come with really late in the game, after we'd just navigated the whole multimedia class scheduler survival guide, was I think the hyper-threaded reference was Mac OS, not with Windows.
It's at some point these folks, and not picking on one, but all of these different companies, and Windows is one of them, are going to have to sort out how to get really good performance on these high core count CPUs, because they're coming, right? And not just on the Intel side.
Yeah, well, and that's a little bit further along. We've got some interesting discussion coming on there as well. So just real quickly, I just want to cover some new DAW releases. And this was kind of hinted by Claus when we had him on the show, because I just said, can you talk about any any future development? He says, well, not really, but I've got something coming. And that was Bitwig 4. So Bitwig 4 was actually hit the market. Ableton Live 12, Reason 12. Pro Tools has done an interesting thing with their hybrid. So that was coincided with their new interface, their AVB interface, Carbon. And so their HDX, they've basically redesigned the whole way that the HDX handles the native processing. And they've opened up a whole stack of new channels and tracks and all the rest of it. So they are actually leaning very heavily towards the native side as well. So are they prepping? Obviously, they're prepping for some higher core counts. They're kind of starting to lean a little bit towards back towards the Mac OS. So I'm wondering if that is to do with they're prepping for the Apple, Silicon M1,
It
M2.
could be.
Yeah.
So I mean, Apple's coming out with new stuff, and they have to support it. So that's where the dev effort's going to go here for a bit.
Yeah. And look, the carbon interface is interesting because it's only just been reintroduced. It's only been introduced, and it is. I've been told it's one of the interfaces that has been affected by that AKM convertifier, which is my next subject on the list. And I think Chris can kind of come in here and give some views on that as well. So for people that aren't aware, AKM are probably, would they be the largest provider for converters to the audio industry? Chris, would that be safe to say?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. By a large margin?
Yep, because they are the ones that make the cost-effective versions of converters.
Right. Okay. So the AKM factory, and they only had one. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm pretty sure they only had one. In Japan, they had a fire, and they had more than a fire. The thing burnt to the ground. When I say literally, it burnt. Wow. It burnt to the ground. Right. So complete destruction. Production has completely stopped, which has obviously affected all of the audio interface developers who are relying on these chips that weren't already stocked up. Now, I've got to be a little bit careful here because I know of some interface lines that are about to go and they haven't been officially announced, right? But needless to say, I think we're going to be seeing some attrition in the next 6 months. What say you, Chris?
There's a couple of factors. The first one is the factory disappeared to the ground.
Completely, yeah.
The second is that it happened while COVID was happening,
yep.
And that meant that all the other suppliers started ramping their production down as well.
Right.
Which was pretty much everyone's approach. COVID's happening, let's start ramping stuff down.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't a very smart move because there are other converters on the market. And depending on what interface and its price point and its performance, depending on what you put in there, it's basically led to a 70-week delay in converter chips.
Hang on.
Wow.
Repeat that again.
Almost 70-week delay on converter chips. More than a year.
Wow.
And a lot of that is because the automotive industries and some of the industries that are much larger than music and audio
yes,
have basically bought up everything that was left in the market.
Of course they would. Yeah, of course.
And we've seen that happen before. But what I didn't understand completely was I was just like, well, great, let's find another converter, drop it in, and let's go.
No, not that easy.
No, not to the high end interfaces where they are, linked in a very high level. And basically, what I know and what I've been told is that a lot of the more higher end interfaces that have been impacted directly are pretty much going to get discontinued. And stock we're probably talking more 3 to 4, 5, 6 months. It's about right. And I think it's really, there's a battle on now to start redesigning some of those models into re-releasing new ones with converters that are actually going to be available.
Right.
So it is a big problem. It's a big problem on higher end interfaces, 6, 8 channel interfaces in that top end more than anything.
Yep.
And it's not good. It's not good at all. I think for a lot of the companies and I know the ones that I speak to directly are saying, look, we've got about supply of this many months, and then we know the next ones are this many months times 10 away. So we have a problem.
Yep.
So this is a watch this space because I think we're going to start to see, and look, we've been given forewarning of a bunch of models that will be finishing. There's also a lot of rationing going on too. So I think a lot of companies are going, well, I've got this many chips and I make 5 different products and 3 of those products don't sell as well as 2. So we're not going to really make those, but we're going to keep making these 2.
Yep.
And there's going to be a lot of that too. So it is a problem. The scale of it, I don't know that anyone's really talking about how big a problem it's going to be. And then it's going to really be a matter of how quickly some of these companies can redevelop products and where they're going to get their converters from. There are lots of other converters on the market, but these guys can't just ramp up overnight. They can't just make 10 times more because their facilities don't allow that. And creating bigger facilities and production lines doesn't happen overnight.
Correct.
So yes, this is a concern.
Yeah. Look, I've had various discussions with some of my contacts, and one of the major guys said to me, and I asked him about 4 months ago, and he said he had 6 months supply. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And I haven't seen any of the manufacturers actually announce any of the culling just yet, but I'm expecting it. And
they won't because there's still supply in the market. So there's still people that have them. Stores have still got them. Dealers, distributors still got. Until that starts to flush through. Yep. You won't ever sort of see them going, "Hey, this is discontinued off our website," because that'll create panic. But that'll happen pretty quick.
Yeah.
If anyone's after an 8-channel interface, I would suggest that they go out and buy it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because in a couple of months' time, might not be able to get it.
Yeah, I've already said that to a couple of clients, and they thought I was playing the car salesman. I'm going, no, mate, AKM fire, and they've gone, what's that? And then they've looked it up and they've gone, right, can you order me one of these?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other white elephant in the room that no one really talks about is digital mixers, because digital mixers also use exactly the same converters, and they use multiples, right? Because there's lots and lots of channels. So, we're starting to see digital mixers dry up a little bit in the channel as well. So, it's another one that is of a concern.
Yep, and that's huge that's a huge market for personas.
Of course, it is for a lot of big companies, right? So where they're going to get their stash from, who they're going to. It's going to be a bit of a game, I think. Well, not so much a game, but I think it's going to be all on about who can get what converters and how quickly.
Yeah, and from my understanding, it's not as. I mean, you kind of hinted at it before. You can't just drop the converter in. I mean, there's a whole stack of firmware.
No.
And design that has to be changed to actually use these new converter chips.
It's complete redesign, basically, is what I've been told, that you just cannot make it work.
Just by dropping in a different one, yeah. Yeah, and look, that's interesting because, I mean, some of these guys are using FPGAs, so you would think, we'll just flip a couple of gates. No.
Yeah. So, but that also there's other IC shortages as well, because we've got the same problem. COVID sent people home. It sent people buying stuff and using it at home. So there's still a real demand supply problem on some components that are not converters. So it's playing out really, in a pretty bad way. So and that stuff's not so much documented, but there are XMOS chips, really hard to get as well.
Yeah, of course.
So if you're running AVB or you're running any kind of network Dante stuff, you need that, and those are high supply as well. The one that no one really talks about, and the one we'll probably never know about, is what's going on with motherboards. Whether any there's ICs on there that are in jeopardy, but they're big companies. They've probably got a fair bit of supply under the belt.
I'm not seeing any hint of problems there. I mean, there's been problems with computer supply component stuff, definitely, but not motherboards hasn't really been an issue. I mean, I'm kind of navigating some supply issues at the moment, but they're actually not chip-based, believe it or not. It's kind of like, for example, like a case supply is completely dried up in Australia. I went, that was smart, So graphics cards was one thing, but it didn't really impact me because I wasn't. I don't use gamer cards for my default DAW configurations. I use workstation class cards, so I wasn't really impacted by that. But some of the other DAW builders who actually use some of those smaller gamer reference cards, they were in in some deep water there, because the prices that these guys were asking for graphics cards, mate, it was extortion, even now, and it's starting to kind of alleviate a little bit, but some of the larger graphics cards, the RTX cards, they are $1,000 more than when they were introduced. So if we're talking 3070, 3080, 3090, add $1,000 to the price of when they were first introduced. And if anyone doesn't think that's ridiculous, I mean, come on, and they're going, well, what was causing the supply problems, and everyone loves blaming, the circuit. I call it the circuits. Everyone loves blaming the circuit. It wasn't only that; it was the data mining. What's it called? Bitcoin.
Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. So it was they're all mining for coins, and now that a lot of those operations are getting raided and shut down, all of a sudden, guess what's flooding the market? Secondhand graphics cards. So secondhand graphics cards are flooding the market. PlayStations, they were hidden warehouses where there was 3,000 PlayStations in there just cranking away, bit mining. I just thought, well, there you go. So interesting. I think the audio interface and the converter thing, that we haven't felt it yet. I don't think, Chris. We haven't felt it.
I think we're starting, but we haven't felt it yet. No.
Yes, we will feel it, and like you said, if it's a 70-week turnaround. So here's the question: is there any version of AKM that is going to is there going to be a phoenix moment for AKM? Are they going to be resurrecting somehow, or are they gone for good?
Oh no, they're resurrecting, but it's going to.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, it's going to take time because it wasn't just a small factory. It was half a city, and it'll take them time to get production to where the demand is. The demand is huge.
Okay. So they are rebuilding in Japan again.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Did they do their own chip fab?
I believe everything in-house, yeah, was my understanding.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They've lost everything.
Wow.
So, that was full on. And I've read a bit about it, but I don't think I've seen any detail of what actually started the fire. I mean, you got to think, what could have started a fire of that level and intensity to have basically this thing leveled it. It's completely leveled.
Yeah, we'll probably never know.
I don't think we will ever know, Chris. No. Okay, so moving on. CPU wars, mate. This is this is a period of CPU. Well, it is a war that we haven't really seen since the PowerPC versus Intel days. We haven't seen anything like this in 20 plus years. Apple with their Apple Silicon, so they've got the M1. There's an M2 coming, and what is going to be the x86 response? I'm going to talk a little bit about the Intel and AMD side, and then you're across the M1 stuff, so I'm going to be posing some questions directly to you about that, because, I mean, you've got one and you know exactly where the bodies are buried with it, right? So Intel have kind of been asleep at the wheel. They actually have, not kind of, they have been asleep at the wheel the last couple of years. They've kind of been missing those die shrinks. And the interesting thing there is that they've replaced the engineering, or the engineering team, maybe not the engineering team, but they've actually replaced the hierarchy that is directing that engineering team. So the guy that's actually come back to direct that is a guy called Pat Gelsinger. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he was the guy, he was around Intel for about 20 years, and he was the guy behind the Core 2 and also the i7, all right? So, and he kind of left the building in 2009, and he started up VMware. So I think, we're all aware of what VMware is. So this guy's, got some nice points on the resume. And Intel have been missing their marks for the last 3 or 4 years. So they've brought this guy, Pat Gelsinger, back. And immediately we start seeing some movement there, right? So AMD have basically caught up and they've leveled and if they've got in front with the IPC stuff and with the core count stuff, they're over the tops with that small chiplet design where they're basically gluing, smaller chips together. Very clever, very, very clever. Caught Intel napping. So just as a quick overview of what's happening with Intel, they've got the 10th gen. They've just released the 11th gen, which is, I don't know, some bastard on this bloody chip. Myself and Pete spoke about it earlier this year where I'm throwing my hands up going, I don't know what they're doing. What is this? So they've basically shoehorned a new architecture into the same die shrink. It runs too hot for it to actually have anything above 8 cores now. So they've actually dropped it from 10 to 8 cores. There's a new chipset, Z590, and that whole 11th gen architecture, I've only just signed off on it. I only released them this week. Now wait for this, 12th gen. How far do you think it's away, guys? How far? Just off the top of your head. How far away do you think 12th gen is from being announced and hitting the market? I've got crickets. Come on.
I'm going to plead the fifth on this one.
You're going to plead the fifth. Okay, what if I tell you it's Q3? And we're talking the start of Q3. And Pete, this is where it's very interesting for you, is that they're going to coincide the 12th gen with the release of Windows 11, which we're going to get into a little bit further, right? So, and the major change with these chips is that they've got this big little architecture change where there's a number of large cores and there's a number of smaller cores. Now, geez, I wonder where they got that idea, because that's basically what ARM is. ARM's, got the big little type of thing. So if this is Intel's response to the ARM onslaught, it's going to be interesting to watch, right? So I've seen some benches of the 12th gen that have come out, and it's actually running on the Windows 11, Pete, which is you're going to find interesting, right? And the single thread and the multi-thread, even though we're only talking eight big cores, so 8 hyper-threaded cores, and then we've got 8 of the smaller one. I can't remember what they call them, but it's based on the ATOM type of processor. The multi-processing is through the roof. It's actually smacking the 5950 out of the water on some of these preliminary things. So whatever's going on with that threading between the big little that Intel have actually implemented, that could be interesting to watch. For me, we've had this discussion. I've got my arms crossed going, I don't really like where they're going with this, because this is not HEDT. This is not workstation level. They're kind of focusing more on power draw and all that type of stuff, which is all well and cool, but I couldn't care less about power draw. But the big little, that is their roadmap, and I've seen it for the next 2 or 3 generations. So my concern was, where's the HEDT replacement? Because X299, we're 3 gens in, right? X299 has accommodated 7th, 9th, and 10th gen CPUs. It's overdue for a refresh. They've actually there was something that was planned. They've shelved it, right? So they've just gone, you know what, Threadripper could have that upper end HEDT market. We're just going to keep running the X299. Something has finally popped up on the roadmap, and where the current Intel processors, it's always a something like. I confuse the shit out of me. So I basically just say 10th, 11th, 12th, right?
Right. So Vin, one thing that's interesting about this though is we just got finished talking about how most DAW developers don't seem to be able to take advantage of these very high core count systems. So maybe this is not a bad thing for DAWs. The interesting thing is going to be how this big little threading thing within Windows 11, because that's the thing. And the early benchmarks are going, wow, this thing is threading through the roof. So those smaller cores, the non-hyper-threaded cores,
there must be something going on with the thread scheduling that is really leaning on them very, very well, because they are outperforming a traditional 16-core / 32-thread CPU in these early benchmarks.
It comes with its own complexity, though, because those Atom cores don't have all the same instructions.
No, they don't have AVX. Yeah, they don't have AVX. Yeah.
So, the OS has to be aware, and although I haven't programmed for this at all, I assume the applications need to be aware at some level as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, wouldn't the applications be depending on the Windows task scheduling? They won't be able to tell the difference between how are they going to tell the difference between a big and a little core? I thought that's got to be the operating system and the way the task scheduling is being assigned between those.
Yeah, but to an extent, right? So if you're going to use a certain instruction here in a couple of minutes,
yep,
and you've already got a thread scheduled, like how's the OS going to know that, this thread can't go on the smaller core, right? The application has to tell it. Yeah.
Oh, mate. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. So this is Intel's response. And I've already seen the roadmaps for the next, because 12th gen is Q3 this year. 13th gen is this time next year. So they're flying.
Right.
They're flying, right? But I'm still going, where the hell is the X299 HEDT replacement, right?
Yeah.
And this week I finally found something on a roadmap. And so forget about the lakes, right? Forget about the lakes, because they've gone from a lake and they've got a thing called a Sapphire Rapid, which is a Xeon platform. So the lake the water mustn't have been moving quick enough. So now they've gone into the rapids, right? So they've got this Sapphire Rapid code name for the new Xeons. I think they're 10 nano. And finally, on the roadmap, HEDT X299 replacement, Sapphire Rapid HEDT, which is nice. Is the replacement of X299. But wait for this one. Guess when it is?
When?
Q2 22. So the X299, I've seen the roadmap. X299 is going to be still alive for another year. And you know what? I'm not particularly stressed about it. I love my X299 systems, right? And my high-level composer clients love these X299 systems because, guess what? They work within the available threading that these DAWs can manage, right?
Right.
So I am more than happy to run it for another year. I don't care. There might be an 11th gen upgrade, maybe in between, but I did see I don't know whether it was a typo or a leak. But X299, and I'm extremely happy about it, is going to run for another year.
The only issue I ever have with, and by the way, disclaimer on the earlier stuff, I'm not a kernel developer. Maybe they've got that all sorted out.
Yep.
But the only issue I've ever had with Xeon is it's so hard to find decent motherboards for it because there are so few options.
Oh, yeah. Now, when I say Xeon platform, because the architectures are always released in Xeons first, and then they filter down into HEDT.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So HEDT is X299, and the replacement it's going to be called X790. So we're at 590 now.
Yep.
690 is going to be Q3 this year, right? So and it's a new socket. So I've just released the machine that's going to shelf life of 3 to 6 months if I'm lucky, right? Yeah. And I've just signed off on the development of it, and it wasn't easy. Z590 was not easy for me. I won't go into the detail, but it wasn't easy, right? So then 690 and then 790, and they're going to correspond a HEDT replacement 790, but it's not based on these lake architectures. Right. It's based on this Sapphire Rapid thing, right? So that's an interesting one. DDR5, PCIe 5, I think as well. So it's going to be a monster, but it's a year away, right? So let's move over to
Should be good though.
It will be fantastic, right? But AMD are not asleep. Right, because the biggest threat to Intel and Intel is not AMD, and the biggest threat to AMD is not Intel. It's Apple. I mean, they've even admitted it, right? So whatever comes with this M2, and we'll get Chris in the middle of this in a minute, right? So with AMD, apart from what the talking heads on a lot of these YouTube channels where they're just sitting there thinking that AMD are just destroying everything. Well, they are. at that DIY and enthusiast level, they are doing extremely well, right? And they're great. Those Ryzens are great. But it's never been a platform that I've warmed to for lots of reasons, and I won't go into them now, but because I've probably covered it a couple of times. So Ryzen has never been a platform that has fully won me over. And also, even if I did put a whole stack of development time into the Ryzens, the chips are still unicorns. The chip supply is very, very limited, and this is because they moved from a 4-core chiplet to an 8-core chiplet. And the 8-core chiplet is also what they use in the Threadrippers and also in, what's the bigger one called? The Epic, right? So they're cannibalizing these 8-core chiplets, right? And putting them into the Ryzen. That's why that is why there is very limited supply of those larger Ryzens, in my opinion, right? Because there's no other explanation. They're keeping them for the Threadrippers because that's a higher dollar turnover, right?
And that was happening even before COVID, if I recall, right?
Oh, it's been happening for a while. Yeah. So there's always been a unicorn factor to the Ryzen 5s, right? The 5950s especially. So when we move to the Threadrippers, all of a sudden we've got Threadripper Pro. Now, so we've got Threadripper, started at 24 core up to 64, and then we've got Threadripper Pro, wait for this one, starts at 16 and goes to 64, right? Now, Threadripper has now been positioned by AMD as it's not a they don't claim it, they don't position it as a HEDT chip platform, they position it as an enthusiast platform. I've gone, what? Right? Because basically Threadripper Pro has been cannibalizing the Threadripper platform because they're not that far apart price-wise, right? And so they're going, well, where the hell are we going to place this? Oh, here's an idea. Let's put it into the enthusiast market. Now, the problem for us with the DAWs is that the software can't thread to the 24, 32, 64 thread, and so we've lost that whole potential there, right? So that's why the Threadripper platform for me has been completely dead in the water. I'm not going to put any development time in it until the software catches up. So here I am twiddling my thumbs going, okay, let's wait for the higher core stuff when the software catches up, if and when, right? So the Threadripper Pro could be an interesting one.
Gear space just exploded when you said that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's keep them guessing, right? That could be an interesting one for the 16 core, because anything above that, we don't know what the software's going to do with it, right? So there we go, right? So am I looking at Threadripper Pro? I'm looking at all of this stuff, right? But by the time all of this stuff starts leveling out, and this is the other thing that I've been picking up, is Intel, if you can't beat them, join them. There's a series of chips that are coming that are actually chiplet. They're gluing, right, 20 core chips together. So there's a 20 core, and we're going to go 40, 60, 80, right? I can't imagine the size of these dies. They'll be bloody massive.
Yeah,
but
I think they were doing those for server workstations a while back, that they had some special pipelining between them.
Yeah, a dual 28. They did a dual 28. But there is an architecture on the roadmap in the next 2 to 3 years where they are actually gluing chips together. So I think, you can't beat them, join them. There's no way in the world they're going to just sit there and have one monolithic die with 80 cores on it, right?
Yeah, your yield on those would be horrible.
Oh, the yield would be close to zero. So I think this is where AMD were very, very clever with the chiplets. But I also, if you remember the last TechBytes show that we did, I said, I think they've peaked, all right? And that was like sacrilege. What do you mean they've peaked? I said, I think they've peaked. 8 core max, right? They're not making 16 core chiplets. So whatever the fab is, they're not even managing to make 16 core chiplets, unless I'm wrong, and someone will correct me, no doubt, for sure. Someone will correct me if there's a 16 core chiplet. But my understanding is that they've pretty much peaked on those 8 core. They're having trouble actually delivering them now, getting the yield and delivering enough of them. And so with all of the stuff happening with Intel coming up, they're thinking, well, hang on, we've got to announce something. And so what did they announce? 3D cache, right? So they're going, okay, 3D cache for the Ryzen 5, right? It's still Zen 3. I think it's Zen 2, Zen 2, Zen 3, but it's in the Ryzen 5. There's going to be a 3D cache version, right? which they say, well, that's going to give us a 15% IPC. So where Intel are actually delivering 20% on this 11th gen, there's another 20% scheduled for 12. There's 20% IPC. So they're going 40% in 2 generations, all right?
Nice.
AMD have gone, okay, we've got this 3D cache coming, it's going to give us 15 to 20%. Yep, That's great. Then what? Because from my understanding, the chips with the 3D cache are not going to be like the mainstream. They're going to be like kind of not one-offs, but they're going to be kind of special chips. So they're not going to be mass-produced stuff. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I think both Intel and AMD are in. Well, the whole x86 thing is in serious trouble, Pete. I think if Apple deliver with the M2, and this is where I want to bring Chris in to have a chat about the Apple Silicon stuff, because he's been in front of it and he can give us at least a bit of an overview without, the typical over-emotional, Apple, reality distortion. Reality distortion field thing that we kind of cop every time we get into one of those conversations, and everything just becomes so contentious. So, Chris, can you help us out here?
Yes.
Yes.
It's interesting. Okay, it's interesting because there's no real way to compare it right now, and what I mean by that is that we've been playing around with some M1 Mac Minis, and what we've noticed and what we know for a fact right now is that a lot of DAWs, everyone pretty much, doesn't have native code yet. So when you load up a Cubase or a Studio One or whatever you're loading up, they are running in Rosetta emulation still. And there really is no way to compare those software DAWs and their performance to anything else right now, because they're not really working to what I think is their full capacity.
Right.
When you load up Logic and Final Cut Pro and Apple applications, there is no question and plenty of documentation that'll tell you that these things are absolutely on fire with their native code. So they've managed to squeeze out a lot of performance, especially Final Cut, especially the processor intense, rendering that needs to happen.
Yep.
So it's kind of early days. If you were to put an Intel i5 Mac Mini up against an M1, I don't know that you're going to see, and there certainly is nothing that's showing a whole lot of performance increase yet. Now, what is going to be really interesting is that based on what we're sort of seeing with Apple native code, is if all these DAW manufacturers get out there and actually make this work natively, and, it's been out a long time now, and really no one's hit native code yet.
I think actually, just on that one, I think Big 4 is actually, yes, just hit, we're talking last week. Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the really interesting thing to see, because we can't really compare an 8-core M1 CPU with the way that it's made and the way that the graphics are embedded and all the other things to a 12, 14 core or Intel or a Ryzen processor, because it's not. We keep forgetting that they're entry-level machines.
Yep.
And they're based at entry-level pricing. And that's what's made them so attractive. And I think this is actually a pretty clever move on Apple's behalf, because these things are what, $1,100 here? You get a whole lot of machine for not a whole lot of money. And the indications are that for pretty much the average DAW user out there who's running their 2 or 4 channel audio interface, this thing's absolutely screaming. But there is a little bit of stuff that needs to be done. I mean, I think we can't really start to compare how well these machines are running hardware-wise until we really see some native code, because when we load heavily, projects that have a lot of tracks and a heavy processing, right now, I can tell you, and it's not a big secret, it stacks. And it doesn't matter what DAW you're using, the emulation, at some point just breaks.
Yep.
Now, faster processors coming, towards the end of the year, interesting, but they also need their native code. So, I guess a lot of these guys are waiting for that to happen. But, if they can squeeze more performance out of a processor that's cheaper and not necessarily as expensive as, Ryzen Threadrippers, it's interesting days ahead.
Yeah.
And so far, they're solid. They're really cool. And even I've got a lot of interest on the video side as well. And people are out there comparing $1,000 Mac Minis with M1s against their $14,000 12-core Mac Pros.
But this is the stuff that's CPU bound, obviously, because anything that's GPU bound, forget about it.
Correct. But, the comparisons also are not stacking up, and there's a lack of understanding, so from, say, a video point of view, when they're doing, 1 hour video compressions or exports, the Mac Mini did it in half an hour to 45 minutes longer than the big machine running, 14 or 18 cores. And it's like, well, yes, it is. That's why you buy that machine. And from someone who is doing that 48 times every year, that's a big time saving, which equals big cost saving, which means no real problem spending $12,000 on a machine.
Yes.
For someone who's doing it once a month and doing it sort of, as a hobby, then the extra half an hour for what you pay for the machine for that render is totally worthwhile. So the perspective is lacking a little bit at the moment, and so is the way we compare things.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to seeing some native code in some DAWs that we all know pretty well, because we'll be able to actually then start to really see how well these machines are running.
Yep.
The early indications, and obviously Apple have had years, months, whatever, to prepare their own apps for this, is good. I mean, it's exciting, and so is a price point. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the next gen and where they target and what those price points are going to be as well. Because for me, that's really what it's all about. It's an interesting package they're putting together.
Yeah, I look, Apple being Apple, I wouldn't be expecting miracles when they start releasing that M2. Those higher core CPU, they're not going to be price conscious. There's no way. The iMac Pro and the Mac Pro replacements. I didn't even look at the new iMac spec pricing. That would be similar to the Mac. I don't know. I didn't even look at them. Chris, do you have anything on those new nicely fluorescent very thin iMacs that have just come out? Are they basically just a Mac Mini in a bigger screen?
Pretty much. So what was it last year? They released the iMac Pro, which was a more solid, well, not more solid, but it was a faster machine.
But that was based on a Xeon, right?
Correct. The new ones are not. So they're just basically the Mac Mini repackaged with a nice screen. So
what I'm saying is that we're not really going to be seeing what we're dealing with until the M2 comes out. Now, I've heard some rumors and about maximum core counts and stuff. And if they actually deliver, I think Intel and AMD and x86, including the whole Wintel and the whole Windows DAW area, that's going to be challenging if they actually deliver, and how quickly they can get that native code. Look, I've been trying to monitor some threads, and I know Pete has as well, and it's just you can't get any sense out of them, because if you try and ask a question, they'll just sit there and jump down your throat. I remember early on there was on one of the websites they developed a benchmark for PreSonus Studio One on the M1, and they did these comparative benchmarks, and I downloaded it and went, okay, and they're trying to compare it to, I don't know, I can't remember what they were comparing it against. It's an i5 or something like that, an i7, and it wasn't an i7, it was an i5, and they were saying, oh man, this completely destroys this i5, and they were using just the inbuilt plugins on Studio One. This is very early on, so the whole thing was running under Rosetta, as you said, and I thought, okay. So then I downloaded the benchmark and I ran it on my 6-year-old dev machine, right? And I got close to what the M1 was doing, and I thought, got
to compare apples with apples, right?
That's a 6-year-old. That's a 6-year-old CPU. Okay, I'm not really excited, but again, that was running under emulation. I was just going on what they were rabbiting on about. That this thing is just going to destroy everything. So it is interesting. I know that the developers are working very, very heavily with M1. Or Apple Silicon, whatever they want to call it. Is it Apple Silicon? Is what they call it?
That's the family, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't think that big Mac Pro with a Xeon processor is going to get replaced anytime soon. I think that there's just far
Mate,
too much.
End of the year, Chris.
I think end of the year for that. My guess, my best guess, and from what I've sort of been reading and hearing and talking, is that I think that mid-level machine is probably what's coming out next. I don't think they're going to go from an 8-core CPU at this price point to a $14,000 silicon 24-core machine anytime before next year.
Well, it's supposed to be up to 32 core at the end of the year.
Yeah, maybe big jump.
Let me throw another one out there.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about Qualcomm, who they bought. What's the company name? Nuvia, right? Which had some ex-Apple A series engineers in that, and so they're also working on M1/M2 competing products.
Right.
And maybe we'll see that they end up rising up where AMD and Intel aren't.
Yeah. Well, look, and just on that note, there's been some interesting acquisitions with both Intel and AMD. All right. So Intel, I'm not sure whether the acquisition has actually been completed, but they were putting in a bid for RISC-V, which is
RISC-V, I think, right?
Sorry, RISC-V, right? So
yeah.
Which is a an ARM competitor of some description, open source, from my understanding. So Intel have put in a bid for that. So they I don't know what water what they're sniffing in the water there.
That group did a bunch of really interesting work, but their issue was always that they were just like a little kind of open group, that they didn't have a chip fab behind them or didn't have that stuff. So that could be super interesting.
Yeah, that could be interesting. AMD have just, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure if the deal's been done, but they're acquiring Xilinx, all right, which is the FPGA chip that is being used in most of our audio interfaces, right?
And synthesizers and everything else. I'm pretty sure I've got 20 of those chips sitting around in here in different devices.
Yeah, definitely. So AMD Xilinx, Intel RISC-V, ARM has been acquired by NVIDIA. I don't. You could go down a rabbit warren there. All right.
Fun times ahead.
It is interesting.
It's a good shakeup.
Yeah, the whole chip thing. The whole chip thing is good, and that leads us to the new operating systems. All right. So this one kind of came out a little bit out of. Well, for me, it kind of blindsided me a bit. For you, Pete, I know that you've been working on it for the last 18 months. But Apple have released OS 12, or announced OS 12. And so, and here's some interesting kind of parallels, right? So they ran OS 10 for 16 different versions for 20 years. And then they went to OS 11 for the release, or was it Big Sur or whatever, for the M1, right? And then they've got OS 12 about to come out as well, right? Which is the next one. So that's interesting. And I had a bit of a look at the feature release of some of the leaked stuff. Well, actually, it's not leaked. The beta's out. And I looked at some of the features that they were promoting, and I went, yeah, that kind of looks a bit familiar, because they're focusing on conferencing and messaging and all interaction type of stuff. And so when we fast forward to the worst kept secret once it started leaking, that Windows 11 was coming out. Now, what was interesting there for me, Pete, was that Windows 10 was supposed to be the last ever version.
Yeah. Different executive, different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And we've had lots of discussions in the back end, Pete, and those discussions are going to stay in the back end, because I don't want to have those discussions in a public forum. I've only made a couple of comments publicly. One was that I don't see the urgency. People are going, oh man, I've got to go to Windows 11. I don't see the urgency. Right. And so my comment to those, and that's the only comment I've ever made, and it's probably the last one I will make on those forums, was that if there was something in the product launch that resonated with you, that spoke to you in a way that going, hey, you know what, that's going to be really cool, mate, go for it, right? If there wasn't anything that resonated with you that much, just stick with Windows 10, because it's not going anywhere. So that was my public comment, right?
Yep.
And I've only got 2 comments, right, with Windows 11.
Each has 17 parts.
Yes, but I've only got 2 comments. No, I'm going to keep it short, right? So when it comes to the launch event, right?
Yep.
I've only got 1 comment. Ready?
Yeah, I'm gonna be quiet.
Ready? Mac and cheese. That's it. That's my whole comment, right? Because when I was looking at all of those features that were coming out and the kind of trying to get the motivation of what was going on and all the rest of it, 1, it was very similar to what was happening in Mac OS 12. And 2, it just had 3 layers of cheese on it. So that launch event, I'm sorry, Pete, that was the most cringe.
No, I'm gonna la right now. So,
But it's seriously, mate, it was the most cringeworthy thing. I started watching going, have I tapped onto the right? What's going on? This guy there is almost in tears announcing this thing. I've gone, oh, mate, just dial it down a bit. So it just reminded me of a Mac event, but with a couple of layers of cheese. And the only other comment I'm going to make with Windows 11, and I like some of the GUI stuff, the rounded corners and nice icons. And, the GUI stuff I really like. I actually like it. But you know why I like it? It's because it looks like what I've been using skinning my own custom skins since
Right.
XP.
Yeah, I've seen your skins.
Right?
Yeah.
I really like the GUI look of it, right?
Yeah.
Didn't necessitate a new version number? No. So my only comment, Pete, sorry, block your ears, is this was Microsoft's Spinal Tap moment, all right? This goes to 11 because I don't really see any other reason why this is designated, it was enough to designate a new version number when, hear me out, you guys announced that Windows 10 was the last ever version, all right? Now,
all right, let me say something.
Yes.
Let me say something. Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so yeah, the Windows 10 is the last version ever. Okay, that was a moment in time. So, whatever. But you and I know, and everybody knew that every Windows release kind of acted like a new version.
Windows
talked about.
Yes, Windows 10 was a brand.
So
Windows 10 was
right,
pretty much
we don't need
a
to
brand.
rat hole on that. It was just the name of the product.
Yes.
So there are some interesting things there. I know there's been a bunch of kernel work, and I know folks that are out just in the industry have said like, oh, hey, my Surface Pro X, which is an ARM-based PC, performs much better under 11 versus 10. Now, I haven't verified that myself, but that's what I've heard from a few folks.
Okay.
The other thing, which is interesting from a support standpoint, is Windows 10 ends up, like the latest version of Windows 10 ends up being supported through to 2025, right?
Yeah, but and that's the question.
Hold on one second. No. I don't have a crystal ball on that. Right. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because each of the individual, like most of the builds of Windows 10 that are actually all the releases that are earlier than 1909 are actually not supported right now because we're able to take each one of those and they're supported for, I forget the exact amount of time.
18 months,
right?
mate. 18 months.
Yeah. So.
And then they extended a bit, I think. Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, so.
A new version number, it's a new product. You end up with, like, the previous one then gets some extended support beyond that, where if we just, like, made the new one Windows 10 version, like, whatever number we want to call that, then we would have to kind of force everybody onto it, which is not what we're doing. Right. And I've told the musicians on Gearspace and other places too, it's like, treat it like any other OS upgrade. Look at it and see, does it improve my experience in some way? Am I going to use the new things that are in there? And if not, you've got until 2025, and many people are going to upgrade their hardware by then anyway.
Yeah. So now here's interesting, and that also brings up a bit of a contentious issue that triggered with the Windows 11 release.
Yeah.
And this is a question I asked you, and you couldn't answer it for me, and I know you can't answer it, but I'm thinking out loud here, right? So we've got Windows 10. We're at 21H2. There's been some weird issues at 21H1, which I might go into a little bit later, right? Not massive, but there's been some kind of little quirks with 21H1. So there has been some dots being shifted under the bonnet, right, with these Windows versions, and this is the discussion we've had numerous times, right, especially with performance differences and that type of stuff. So 21H, I just saw an announcement of 21H2, right? But that's going to be coinciding with Windows 11, all right? Or they're not going to be spaced too far apart. So if, and again, I know you can't answer this, but this is me thinking out loud. If Windows 10 is going to be supported to 2025, does that mean there's going to be a 22H1, 22H2, 23?
Yeah.
And if it does, why would anyone go to Windows 11?
Well, that's the first part of that I can't answer.
Yes,
obviously,
and probably the second one you probably is a difficult one to answer as well, because if Windows 10, better the devil you know, right? For us, I'm talking about my perspective, right?
Yeah, for musicians who have dedicated PCs that are primarily for music, there are some reasons that are related to security and stuff that I know you and I have had some colorful conversations about.
Yes, animated discussions. Yes.
Yeah. But the rest of it's like I said, down to what are you going to use? Are you going to use it? Or does it turn out that you have a new PC with a high core count and, hey, this runs better on that than it did with Windows 10?
Okay, so this is the interesting thing, all right?
Yep.
We're back to the Wintel alliance. As much as the AMD guys in there are going, what the hell are you talking about? We are back to a Wintel alliance because Microsoft have been working very, very closely with Intel with this big little architecture, and they are going to be doing a simultaneous release. This is the stuff that I've been hearing, right? So that's one. How is Windows 10 going to be fitting into that picture, right? If you've made major kernel changes at Windows 11 for this big little, if they're not implemented, if they're not backported to Windows 10, all right?
Yeah,
so
don't know.
That again, we can't answer it. This is me thinking out loud, right? Because this is me thinking, right? I know Windows 10.
Vin,
Yes.
The only thing I will say is the idea that it's a Wintel thing is definitely your perspective on it.
Yes.
There has been a lot of work done for AMD and Qualcomm and everybody else.
Yes, of course. But when you see reports of a simultaneous release, right, of the 12th gen, and they're going to be simultaneously release it with Windows 11, that's showing there's a strong alliance there. That's not saying that they're not working with the other guys. Of course they're not. Of course they're still working there. They have to, right? But it does show, to me, it does indicate there's a stronger alliance that has been formed there, right? What that means in the end, we don't know, right? The interesting question for me is whether Windows 10 actually gets those kernel level changes to be able to implement the big little. Because if it doesn't, I don't care whether it's updated to support up to 2025. With the new architectures that are coming out, I won't be able to run it, right?
Realistically, though, Vin, most of those big little things are probably going to be in laptops, which come preloaded with the OS anyway. Like, I don't know how much of that big little is going to make it down to, motherboards that in DIY builds, or
Mate,
when that
it's going to be massive. This is Intel's complete new roadmap for anything below HEDT is big little, completely. All right, Z690 is a different socket 1700, and it's actually big little. And
okay, yeah,
and so's the 13th gen. Right? So this is their roadmap. All right. So at that, what we call upper level enthusiasts below HEDT, it's all big little. All the desktops are going to be big little. All of them. Right? So it's not just laptops. They've put all the eggs in this basket. And if it doesn't work, I think that, we could be hearing a bell toll, right?
I'm sure there'll be some solutions out there, but I honestly obviously can't say what's happening with Windows 11 kernel versus 10. One, I don't know. And two, I couldn't say if I did know. But we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah. And look, and just want to make one real quick point, because Chris has had direct experience with this, right? And I'm talking about, because we've discussed performance variables between different versions of Windows, and also, tweaked versus non-tweaked. Right now, Chris has got an interesting perspective on this, because I've got two perspectives, which I'll share really, really quickly. One, with the X299 machines being 3 generations in, I've had a client that came to me that had a very early version of my Windows 10 deployment, a 1511, right? And we were running Studio One, we were running a whole stack of UAD stuff, and I had run a whole stack of benchmarks on that machine before deployment. So I had a reference of how that machine, exactly how that machine performed at these particular latencies at the time of deployment, right? 1511, and I can't remember what Studio One version it was, and the UAD. It comes back in. He's trashed the operating system. I've put a later version of Windows, optimized version of Windows 10 on. I put the latest version of Studio One on, put the UAD drivers on, ran exactly the same benchmarks, and I had to drop one latency setting and about 40 or 50 plugins out before I cleaned the playback. Now, we're talking 3 years apart. So what caused the variable? Was it the version of Windows, or was it Studio One? I think there was a bit of a combination. But I know that 1511 for me was the most performant Windows 10 that I ever released. I knew that. And then it just started getting a little bit, that there was always a small percentage of performance variable between each successive versions, and you know that I haven't deployed every version. I've been leapfrogging. So that was an interesting perspective. And the other thing, and this is where I think I'll get Chris to give his perspective, is that I built him a Windows support machine. And so I gave it to him with one of my highly optimized Windows versions, all right? But because it's an earlier version and he has to do product support, he's got multiple SSDs in there booting into different later versions of Windows. And I'll let him actually tell the story. But I mean, he conveyed to me there was definitely a performance variable between the tweaked and the non-tweaked. Yeah, do you remember that conversation, Chris?
I do. I guess for me, it's a bit of a big picture thing. You have, when you're sitting behind the phone trying to support a large variety of customers, you've got that 70% that, are enthusiasts, they're at-home guys, they're possibly not doing music for money, and they are at the latest Windows version every time because they can't help themselves but hit update every single time that there's an update. And that's a good 70 to 75%, maybe closer to 80% of what we sell, right? And usually they're two-channel interfaces. The performance on them is pretty rubbish. But for that level of customer, not a problem. That's what they're used to. They layer tracks. They probably don't ever run more than 24. You can go from that customer and then 5 minutes later be speaking to a composer running 200 tracks.
Yep.
And that happens every day. So you need to shift the way that you think and the way that you help support them. Those people need, I see them almost like a commercial kind of person. It's a little bit like cutting grass. When you cut grass for a living, you don't go and buy the domestic lawnmower that everyone runs once a month. You go and buy what you need to run your business.
Correct.
Maybe it's not the larger percentage of the market. Well, we know it's not, but it's an important part because it also filters down, from a wholesale point of view, it also filters down the lower end sales, because when people see the higher end guys, the pro guys using stuff, it's a bit like a fashion statement. They have to have it. They're like drummers. Oh, look at that drum kit up there that my favorite band's playing. That's what I've got to go use. And there's no doubt, and yes, we have machines running multiple SSDs with multiple Windows versions all the time, that we can push optimized machines, whatever magic is tweaked in them to run at a higher performance and also at a constant performance. And that's not for everyone, but for the guys that need it, they love it. It's what they want. It's what they demand. And it's what makes me laugh about reading forums, which is kind of why I don't read as many forums as I once used to, is that guys that want to sit there and compare their really expensive AMD Ryzen processors against Intel and tell everyone else how good theirs are. I mean, they're actually not the guys making music, which is hilarious, because the guys at that top end are creative guys that just need to come in, switch the machines on, get to work, and work, right? So it is what it is, and it's a solution service. It's a solution provider service, and it's one that is super important. Yeah. Now, the tweaking that goes on, look, I do the same thing when I install my machines at home. I couldn't care less about what version of Windows I'm running. It's just got to be the one that has all the stuff removed that I don't need out of it. I don't need all the fancy stuff out of it because I know my way around computers really well. But I'm also been doing it long enough to know that many customers do need that experience. We all need to be able to talk to Suri and talk to Google and do all that kind of front end stuff, because the thing that has really changed is we've got generations of people creating music now who grew up with phones in their hands that are 10 times more powerful than what we were playing with 15 years ago. So that experience, that front end, that kind of slick experience is what they kind of demand all the time. What they don't realize is that has to change. And in order to keep that up, new hardware needs to happen. And obviously their old software won't work on that. And they need to go to new versions of Windows to get that next level of thing they want. And then their old stuff won't work on it. And it's just the nature of the beast. It's like being a photographer. There's new cameras out by Sony and Canon every 6 months, So it is a different, I do look at it from a big picture point of view and really try and qualify what people actually really need and who they are. Are you a customer that is charging money for your production? Then you really need to be looking at this level of machine. You really need to be looking at these high core counts. Are you not that? Are you a guy that's just, at home making music for fun? You know what? Your $1,000 Mac Mini on your M1 is probably going to go okay for you. But it really is a matter of that qualification.
Yep. And look, and one of the discussions that we were having earlier this week was that that it seems to be a bit of a qualm where there is a lack of qualification at that sales level from what people are really needing and what they're being sold.
100%. It's actually the worst it's ever been. 15 years ago, a lot of the customers that we had and we were supporting were really kind of hardcore, really into their craft, really understood the intricate levels of the way that stuff worked, really understood how to move around MIDI, although it wasn't a great platform to work on. It's not what happens now, now, and especially over COVID, sending people home, we've had a lot of audio interfaces go to people trying to run Zoom meetings and trying to survive at home with their jobs, getting pretty angry that they can't get stuff working. But they also don't understand that getting on a Zoom, doing loopback, doing video conferencing is actually nothing easy about it. No. Trying to run OBS in the background is a nightmare. It's not a user-friendly piece of software. No. And we have that other end of it too, where, that lack of understanding of how to run some of these apps and then the unwillingness to spend time on them is a massive problem. It's a daily problem that we face almost all the time.
Yeah. And look, and in regards to product support stuff, you navigate a far wider range of stuff, But things for me that have been a bit niggly of late, I've had, there's a certain piece of software that's quite popular that is still requiring .NET Framework 3.5 from 2008.
Yep.
I mean, what? Right? And it's a new release, right? And the whole thing with, you think .NET Framework 3.5, that's easy. Windows 10 doesn't really make it easy to get it on sometimes,
That's why it comes with the installers, doesn't it? Like you see it a lot now when you actually install the software that the next
No, it doesn't.
Some of it does. Some of it does.
Not .NET Framework 3.5. No way. You've got to go through the update. You got to go through an update procedure. And look, that's all fine for the majority of people, but for me that has a lockdown system, let me tell you, it is it's caused me some grief that I've spoken to Pete about. Even where I had a standalone .NET Framework 3.5 installer for certain revisions of Windows 10 that didn't install it. It ran, and then it just said, no, we still need another component. So that was one of my gripes.
I think the thing, though, is that this is a bit of the nature of the beast, right? I don't think any platform, I don't think Windows is any worse or bad at or better than Mac OS. No,
but this isn't a Windows operating system problem. This was, my point is that the developer was still had a requirement for a .NET framework that was 13 years old.
Yeah.
All right?
They had a hard check during the install for that specific version, yeah.
Yeah. But then, the new version is actually no longer requiring it, right? But guess what? I've had clients that have tried to install it and said, well, you need this, you need not .NET version 4 point, whatever, what's the latest one, 8, right? It's installed, but it's still saying that it needs to be installed. You can't install it when it's already in. So you try and install it, it's saying it's already installed. So we're caught in this bloody loop. Another one is... and
I just want to write music. What's going on?
Yeah, and some of the other kind of niggly things I've had is where, and this is one specific client, and I don't know what he's done. He has done something, but installers are refusing to run. And I've just got this growing list of these plugins that he double clicks the installer and it times out. It doesn't run. And then he sends me the installer and I run it on 3 or 4 different Windows 10 machines here and every one of them runs. I've gone, what have you done? He goes, I have no idea. Right. And
I didn't do anything except for the things that I did yesterday.
Oh no! I've got a fair idea what may have broken it, but the thing is, because I can't clarify, I'm not going to mention it, right? But there has been a few things, but that's a kind of small snippet of some of the stuff that I kind of deal with, and there's copy protection stuff, and
I mean, plugins are probably the thing that comes up the most for me. People will update their DAW and run the latest version, but completely and utterly forget that their plugins have also had updates that they never run. And that's the number one thing that stops most things. Or they're trying to run a set of plugins that they purchased a very new versions, but they're 15 versions of OS behind and they don't work on there. And then they're trying to run a really old DAW and you're like, none of this is going to work.
No. And one of the things that I have now encountered because of my lockdown machines is that clients are now, and we're talking 3-4 years in now with Windows 10, and it's actually 6 years, Pete, so it's longer than that, where they're encountering some installers will just say, no, it ain't going to run on this. Thanks very much. You need to update your Windows. So I've got to that cycle point now where some of these machines, these early Windows 10 machines, we're now having to do either inline updates or I just blow them away when we redo them again. I know Pete always does his inline updates. I've never liked them. They've never behaved the same for me when I update from one Windows 10 revision to the next. So that's why I sit back and watch the litany of complaints when people are trying to upgrade and it doesn't upgrade, or when they complete the upgrade and then it breaks little things and all the rest of it. And I've just gone, you do understand you've basically just superimposed a brand new operating system onto your previous operating system.
Right. The big upgrades really, they do. They set the old stuff aside and install everything new.
100%. That's what I'm talking about. It's the tick, not the talk, right? So it's always but they're the ones that so I don't participate on the forums much at all when it comes to the operating system anymore, but I always have a chuckle. Well, I've tried to update this one 10 times and I'm just going, why? Wipe it. Just wipe it. And they go, I can't wipe it. Well, why are you upgrading? Is it broken? Is it broken? Nope. Why the necessity? This is the thing that I never understand. They always have to sit there and the machine's working perfectly, but they think, oh, hang on, I need to necessitate an upgrade to a later version for what particular reason? I don't know.
I blame the virus companies, or the antivirus. You got to be on the latest version. You got to run this. You got to, and we're at some point. That's all we hear, update to be safe. And there is an element of that, but there is also an element of going too far with it. If it's not broken there's no massive security breach that's going on because your machine's not even on the internet, then don't break it, don't update it. and
even if it is on the internet, a lot of my clients, their internet activity on their DAWs is basically maybe some basic email or activation, software activation stuff. Some of them have, a lot of them have, don't even have the email on their primary DAWs. It's basically, this is their tool, and obviously not everyone can do that, but it's been quite, I'm touching wood, but it's been quite good over the years. I haven't had really that many problems with, my lockdown approach, and I've upgraded people when I've when there's been an absolute necessity to, and they've been fine. But I've also had people that, have had their IT expert mate that have reversed all of my lockdowns and gone and updated it, and then they ring me because the whole thing's completely hosed, and I'm going, what do you do? I'm going, re-image it, mate. Start again,
with that lovely disc that I provided you.
Yes, correct. Boot into that and re-image it back, Yeah.
I mean, look, I reformat all my machines at least once to twice every year because.
Do you?
Well, yeah. Well, with all the crap hardware that we install and test and remove and take away, I mean, it just gets to a point where you just go, well, is this 14th driver version of this that I've put on here over the last year actually conflicting with something else? And, yes, it does. So it is, you've got to, I don't know. I think that's general cleanup, right? I mean, but look, let's face it, I don't really know too many people that I can count past one hand that know how to do a clean install of any OS. And there's probably a lot of people that shouldn't be, because then the other fundamental aspect is they don't understand what backing up means. So, it is a dangerous path to go down, and it's certainly nothing that is easy to recommend to anyone over the phone. As far as support goes, it's the last thing that you want to tell someone to do, as is updating their BIOS, as is making changes to the registry. They're no-go zones because they just end up in a very bad place. Yep.
But again, there's always experts, mate. Oh, just do that. Run this fantastic Windows optimization tool and registry cleaner.
Boy, do I hate those.
Oh man, we could go on for hours in regards to some of the support stuff. I've got a nickname for some of the less knowledgeable support stuff that I've encountered. Some of the people, I call them picnic, and you go, what the hell's a picnic, Vin? And picnic is problem in chair, not in computer. All right. And so I've gone, I think this is a picnic moment. And they're going, what do you mean? I said, because it's not So I've logged in and Pete, we've had this discussion before. I haven't changed anything. I haven't done anything. And I kind of do a remote in and go, why is there 300 gigabyte of data sitting on your C drive? Well, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
It's true. Like when you talk about the lockdown systems and like, oh, I only use email. It's like, well, except for that one time I was browsing. Really? And then if you look at a log, it's like every week.
Yeah, the sports and entertainment sites, if you know what I mean. So they're always kind of navigating those ones. Hey, you know what, guys? We are, 2 hours, way over 2 hours in. So this has been fantastic, and I reckon we could probably go for another hour. But I think what we should do now, and here's one of my favourite sayings, let's put a pin in it, all right? And we'll definitely get Chris back again, because that was great. Totally. That was great, mate. And
thank you for having me.
Yep. And so thanks to both of you again. Pete, again, above and beyond. We had... Look, there was a stack of stuff that we could have spoken about Windows 11, but you know what? It like you said, it's the whole Chicken Little thing. And, I decided that I wasn't going to bring it up, right? Because it's too early. There could be some changes made by the time we get to the release. So that's why I didn't bring it up. And I just thought,
we'll talk about it later, though, for sure.
Yeah, we will, because, depending when the release, when it's actually released, then we'll know exactly where all of that lands. I'm not even going to mention it, but you know what I'm talking about, right? We'll know exactly where all of that lands, right? Then we can have the discussion. And I think that's the better time to have it. I mean, some of the ridiculous hysteria from the Mac leaning media that I've been reading about the Windows 11, I just won't even mention it. So it's just kind of silly. Let's leave it till when it's actually hit the ground, right?
Yep.
All right. So with that, I think we'll just sign off. Thanks again, guys, for your time and energy. And, okay, on to the next.